Hey guys, tonight we're leaving the crisp, frozen snow and stepping into something slower, softer, and messier. The long, patient world of mud. Not dramatic floods, not roaring rivers, just the endless, everyday problem of soft ground under human feet. Think of a path between houses, or from a cottage to a well, or along a field edge. In dry weather, it's simple. Dust, grass, hard earth. You walk and forget you're walking. But then the rains come, or snow melts, or a river overflows just a little. The same path that carried you confidently yesterday becomes sticky, slippery, deeply rutted, uncertain. Tonight, we're going to stand in the doorway of a house on the first truly wet day and look at that change slowly, calmly, seeing how people turned mud from a daily enemy into something they could live with, one careful footprint at a time. When ground stops being just ground. Dry earth feels like a promise, solid, predictable, quiet. Mud is earth that has changed its mind. All it takes is water, a long, soaking rain, snowmelt running from higher ground, a nearby stream rising just enough to seep into its banks, even heavy morning dew day after day. Firm soil begins to loosen, swell, break apart, drink water until it can't hold more. You see it first at the edges, puddles gathering in hollows, darker patches where the earth looks heavier, footprints staying visible longer than usual, shining where they fill with water. Then one day you step outside in the same way you did all winter, and the ground politely refuses to be a floor. Your heel sinks, your foot slides. A quiet sucking sound says, "Today I am not solid." The first misstep of the season. The first real mud step usually catches someone by surprise. A person walks out with their mind on wood or errands or neighbors, steps onto a familiar path, feels it give way underfoot. Not a dramatic fall, just one foot suddenly lower than expected, the other foot sliding as it tries to catch up, a small splash up the leg, a boot or shoe immediately heavier with wet earth. They stop, blink, and look down. The path that looked perfectly normal from the doorway is now stamped with the fresh print of their shoe. Water slowly welling up into the depression, edges of the footprint already beginning to soften. It's a small but clear message. The season has turned. The ground will need more attention now. Where mud appears first. Not all ground becomes treacherous at once. Mud has favorite places. Low spots where water naturally collects. The middle of paths where everyone walks in compact soil so tightly that water can't drain. Gateways and bottlenecks where feet churn the earth more than anywhere else. The edges of fields where hooves, wheels, and boots all pass together. Shaded stretches where sun does not dry things quickly. If you walked the same lane every day through the year, you could almost make a little map in your head. Here it will be soft first. Here, puddles will form. Here, the mud will cling. The path isn't just one uniform line. It's a series of repeating characters. The always damp hollow, the slick slope near the ditch, the churned-up gate entrance where animals pass, the surprisingly firm patch under a larger tree. People learn this one season at a time. Mud teaches slowly, but it never forgets. Mud as a slow thief of time. Mud doesn't roar like a storm or crack like ice. It steals time quietly. Every cautious step is a little slower. Every misstep needs a recovery pause. Boots must be scraped and cleaned. Clothes might be changed. Loads carried from place to place move more slowly. A walk that took 5 minutes on dry ground might take 8, 10, 15 in deep mud. You pick your way around puddles. You choose your landing spots. You skirt the worst patches. A cart that rolled smoothly along a dry lane might sink into ruts, need pushing or unloading. leave wheels edged in sticky clay. Mud doesn't close a path completely. It simply whispers, "If you insist on using this route now, it will cost you a little more of everything: effort, time, patience." Boots, shoes, and bare feet in the soft season. How you meet mud depends on what you wear on your feet. Heavy boots keep skin dry, spread weight a bit more, but collect mud in deep treads, growing heavier with each step. You see people banging boots against a stone to knock clumps off, scraping soles with a stick or door scraper, leaving muddy prints that slowly fade in the yard. Lighter shoes may not sink as deeply, but offer less protection from wetness, soak through quickly, squelch with each step when they fill. Bare feet in some regions and seasons feel everything directly, can sense where mud is thinner or thicker, often slip less because toes adjust and curl, but pay the price in cold and contact with stones or hidden debris. In some places, people simply walk barefoot on muddy roads and carry shoes in hand, putting them on only when they reach firmer ground. The mud becomes something to negotiate with, not something you can command. The first quiet repairs: stones, boards, and clumps of brush. Once it's clear the mud isn't going away this week, people begin small repairs. No grand road building yet, just little comforts slipped under the foot. Around the worst spots, you might see flat stones dropped into the path to create stepping spots, discarded boards laid side by side as short temporary walkways, bundles of brush or straw tossed into deep holes to give something solid to step on, pieces of broken brick or tile pressed into the earth at overused thresholds. These aren't permanent solutions. Boards warp and sink, brush decays, stones tilt and wobble. But each piece says, "We see you, mud. We're not simply surrendering." The path begins to develop texture: patches of stone islands, slim bridges of planks across the worst stretches, small elevated zones where feet naturally aim. A simple lane becomes a quiet game of stepping from one dryish point to the next. Choosing the high side. Most muddy paths have a better side and a worse side. One side may be slightly higher, lie farther from a ditch or fence where water accumulates, get more sun and wind, experience less hoof and wheel traffic. Over time, feet start favoring that higher line. Prints cluster on the drier side. The wetter side grows deeper and churned up more. People tell children, "Walk on this side, not that one." Eventually, the path subtly shifts. The official center may remain where it always was, but the real lived route has migrated a step or two to one side. This migration leaves a faint history in the mud. Old ruts half filled with last week's water, new tracks forming slightly off to the right or left, stones and boards redeployed where people actually walk now. The path isn't a straight line on a map, it's a flexible ribbon, adjusting to what the ground and the season allow. When carts and hooves deepen the problem. It's not just human feet that use these ways. Carts, wagons, and animals press deeper, cut ruts, churn mud into thick, sticky paste. Hooves make sharp holes that fill with water, break up any crust that tried to form on top, mix softer layers beneath with the wetter top, making everything less stable. Wagon wheels carve long grooves, throw up ridges of mud between them, trap water in parallel tracks that can freeze later into polished rails. For walkers, this means stepping between ruts to avoid twisted ankles, balancing on ridges that are themselves slick, timing steps to miss the worst hoof holes. Paths start carrying two stories at once: a deep, heavy story written by wheels and hooves, a lighter, delicate story written by human feet weaving between them. Both are true. Both shape the ground.
Mud rarely disappears just because we wish it would. After the first surprise missteps of the season and the first quick fixes with scattered stones and boards, there comes a quieter realization. This isn't just a bad day. This is how the ground will be for a while. Tonight, we're going to stay with that realization and watch how people slowly begin to build over the softness, not with grand bridges and pavements, but with humble things, planks, branches, brush, woven paths that float just enough over the mud to let feet pass without sinking too deeply. Not to conquer the mud, just to make peace with it. When the path turns to porridge. There are days of mud, and then there are days of soup. After long rain or serious thaw, some stretches of path become bottomless seeming, more liquid than solid, eager to swallow boots, hooves, and wheels. You step in and your foot goes down farther than you expected. Water oozes up and around. The sound changes from a simple squelch to a slow, sticky gulp. Pulling your foot back out feels like lifting something stuck to glue. Even animals hesitate. A horse snorts and shifts weight from hoof to hoof. A cow chooses a messier sideway through scrub rather than the direct line. Dogs skirt the edges, paws finding the least offensive spots. You can still cross, but each crossing feels like a negotiation. How many times will I have to yank my foot free this trip? After a few such days, people look at those patches and think, if this spot is going to stay like soup, we need something that floats on it. The first plank laid down. The simplest floating path begins with a single board. Maybe it started life as part of a crate, a retired fence rail, a spare piece from building repairs, a plank too warped or cracked for neat carpentry work. Someone carries it to the worst pothole of mud. They drop it across the softest section, press it down with a few careful steps, adjust it until it lies more or less flat. At first, it's strange to step on. It wobbles slightly. Mud squeezes up at the edges. Your foot meets something different from the earth you're used to. But once you cross that patch without sinking, your body files away the memory. Step here next time. This is the safe place. Soon, others follow your prints. Child feet, testing with a bit of a jump. Neighbors' boots, feeling the give. Someone with a basket, relieved to step on wood instead of sludge. The path now has a quiet little bridge, only a few footsteps long, but important. From one plank to many, narrow wooden walkways. One plank is helpful. A line of planks becomes its own kind of road. Over time, people add a second board beside the first, lay a few more boards end to end, move boards around as fresh trouble spots reveal themselves. On some especially bad stretches, you might see 2 parallel lines of planks, one for each foot, or a single narrow strip down the middle of the muck, or a woven pattern, boards alternated like a simple wooden lattice. These walkways don't stay perfectly level, shift a little under weight, may dip at one end as mud yields and settles, but they spread weight out. Instead of one boot print sinking deep, the load is shared over the length of the board. The ground has less chance to swallow everything at once. On very muddy days, you can hear the difference in each step, not just squelch, but also the hollow thump of wood, sometimes a small creak, mud sighing quietly as water is pushed aside and then returns. Brush and branches, the softest roads. Not every place has spare boards. In many regions, people turn to brush and branches, flexible twigs, small cut saplings, bundles of reeds or straw, leftover cuttings from hedges. They're laid down in crisscross layers, like a loose mat, directly on top of the worst mud. At first, it looks worse rather than better, a tangle of sticks, uneven, messy, uncertain underfoot. But when you step on it, the brush bends and spreads your weight. The mud grips the lower layers, holding them in place over time. Water can still seep up, but it meets a net instead of your boot sole. With more branches added, the mat thickens. The most rotten pieces sink into the mud and vanish from sight. Fresh layers add structure on top. The whole thing becomes a springy but reliable segment of path. It doesn't look like a road, but your feet recognize it as safer than the open ooze on either side. Corduroy roads, logs laid like quiet rungs. In especially bad spots, deep ruts, low crossings, marshy edges, people sometimes build a more solid version of the brush mat, corduroy roads. These are made of logs, small trunks, thick branches laid sideways across the direction of travel, like rungs of a ladder. Placed close together, they provide many small, firm surfaces for wheels and feet, keep heavy loads from pressing directly into the sludge, let water pass between logs while the path itself sits slightly elevated. Walking on such a road is bumpy, rattles carts and bones a bit, requires careful foot placement so you don't twist an ankle in the gaps. But compared to dragging through knee-deep mud, it's a gift. From the side, a small corduroy section looks like a row of tree slices barely above the sheen of water, a modest raft nailed to the earth, a compromise between solid ground and swamp. It won't last forever. Wood decays, logs sink, but for a season, sometimes for several, it lets people float across what would otherwise be impassable. Keeping the floating path above the mud. Once you've built a floating path, board, brush, or log, you have to keep it floating. Mud is greedy. It pulls boards slowly downward as people walk on them, sucks brush deeper with each rain, eats at wood from below with damp and slow rot. So maintenance begins, lifting and repositioning boards when they sink too far, adding fresh brush on top when older layers disappear, rolling new logs into place as old ones become too deeply embedded. From time to time, someone might pry up a plank, shake off clinging mud, and lay it back with a bit of solid soil under one end. Move a board from a spot that's firm again to a new patch that has gone bad. Trim branches that snag clothing or trip feet. The path is not a finished object. It's an ongoing relationship between people and the soft ground. The earth gives support, the wood gives structure, feet keep testing and telling where repairs are needed. The quiet lane beside the main one. Sometimes a floating path is built off to the side of a main road. The primary lane is used for carts and heavy traffic, becomes deeply rutted and muddy, can't easily be smoothed without big effort. So a narrow side path appears, slightly raised, made of boards, brush, or stones, just wide enough for a pedestrian. From a distance, it looks like an afterthought, but to someone walking with a basket, a child, a bundle of goods, this narrow side lane is more precious than the grander, wider road. It keeps the feet drier. It keeps the pace steady. It allows movement even when wagons bog down. At busy times, you might see wheels struggling in the main ruts, while a little higher, people slip by quietly on their floating path. Two systems parallel, one for heavy loads, one for human legs. The modest little walkway is the road's secret twin, less proud, more reliable. Yard bridges and doorstep islands. Mud doesn't only swallow long lanes, it can also turn doorways and small yards into small marshes. To reach a front door, an outbuilding, a tiny shop, people sometimes build miniature floating paths, a plank across a persistent puddle just outside the threshold, a small wooden island just beyond the door where people can stand and scrape their boots, a short mat of straw and brush between doorstep and firmer ground. You might see prints showing that everyone steps in the same spots, straw repeatedly replaced as it becomes a brown, flattened paste, old portable platforms moved around as the wettest patch migrates. These tiny constructions matter. They keep that first step out of the house from being a cold shock of mud over boot tops or a slippery slide in front of the door. The whole world might be wet, but at least there is somewhere to stand, solid, for a moment while deciding where to go next. Temporary, movable, and good enough. What all these solutions share, boards, brush, logs, mats, are often temporary, movable, and good enough. People know that seasons will change, that mud will eventually dry and crack and become dust, that wood rots and must be replaced, that next year the worst patches might be slightly different. So they don't always build grand surfaces. They build just enough to get through this stretch, just enough to stop boots from being pulled off, just enough to keep a cart moving, if slowly.
Mud doesn't just appear because the ground is weak. It appears because water has nowhere better to be. As long as rain and meltwater can collect in the same ruts and hollows over and over, your path will keep dissolving under your feet. Sooner or later, someone looks at the mess and thinks a very simple thought. If the water wants to go somewhere, maybe we should help it go there and not here. Tonight, we're going to walk alongside the path instead of right on it, watching how people quietly reshape the edges of their roads and yards, digging small ditches, channels, and drains so that mud had less power over where people walked. Not grand canals, not concrete gutters, just the humble art of giving water another option. The real problem, standing water. Mud isn't just wet soil. It's often soil plus water that stays put, day after day, making the same patch soft again and again. You can see where water loves to linger, in shallow bowl-shaped hollows, in low dips where cartwheels have dug deeper, in shaded spots where sun and wind don't reach, in places where harder ground or rock underneath keeps water from soaking downward. After a rain or melt, puddles appear and never fully dry before the next rain comes. Paths stay glossy long after the fields around them look dull again. Each footprint fills with water instead of firming up. So the first step in taming mud is not magical, it's observational. Where does the water want to collect, and how could we invite it to move on? The first shallow channel. Often, drainage begins almost by accident. A frustrated walker drags the edge of their boot through a puddle, or pushes a little trench with the tip of a stick, or knocks a low wall of mud away from the edge of a rut. The result, a thin trickle of water begins to slip out of the puddle, following the new line they've scratched, heading to a lower spot beside the path. They watch the puddle. The surface drops just enough, the center patch firming a little, the worst slipperiness easing. It's a tiny experiment, but it teaches a key principle. If you give water even a small invitation to leave, it often accepts. From there, people get more deliberate, scraping longer channels with shovels, tying puddles together so they flow into one side ditch, making sure they cut a path to some place that won't mind being wet. The path begins to sprout veins, small lines where water moves instead of sits. Path-side ditches, the quiet rivers beside the road. As mud seasons come and go, shallow scratches become ditches. Along the main lane or track you might see a low, continuous hollow on one side or both sides, not very deep, but deeper than the walking surface, sometimes lined with grass or stones, sometimes choked with last year's leaves. These ditches collect the first overflow from puddles, give water a lower channel to follow, slowly carry it toward a lower field, a stream, or an out-of-the-way hollow. On a rainy day, they're small brown rivers, thin sheets sliding along the bottom, thicker flows after heavy storms, sometimes interrupted by clumps of debris that need clearing. In dry times, they're barely noticed, places where wildflowers and grasses grow thicker, soft boundaries between path and fields. But in the wet season, they're the reason not everything is mud. Cutting little lips and notches at the edge. Even with ditches, water needs an entrance. Along a path, especially where wheel ruts sit like two shallow troughs, people sometimes use shovels to cut little notches in the side of a rut, small lips that let water spill sideways, gaps in banks of pressed earth that would otherwise trap water. If you walked along after a rain, you might see tiny waterfalls slipping from the path into the ditch,
thin streams running diagonally from rut to channel, shallow grooves darkened by fresh flow. Someone, sometime in the last day or two, took a moment to stop, jab a shovel in, pry up a bit of earth, and make way. It's small, quick work, but without those little cuts, water would stay in the track, mud would deepen, every cart and walker would suffer more. With them, the path drains faster, surfaces firm sooner, and the ditch does its quiet job. Stone and broken pot, helping water find the right line. Water can carve ditches on its own, but often messily, gullies too deep, sides that crumble, tracks that wander where you'd rather it not go. So people often guide it with stones and other scraps, placing small rocks along a ditch edge to keep it from collapsing, dropping broken pottery or tile in the bottom so it doesn't erode too deeply, using larger stones to direct flow around a corner or away from a path crossing. Over time, these bits of stone settle into the soil, become half-buried, yet continue to shape the way water chooses its path. From above, you might just see a line of slightly exposed rocks along a roadside hollow, a few clearly placed stones at the entrance where rut drains, trails of small stones marking where water has been guided across a yard. It's not a grand wall or canal, it's just human fingers rearranging the ground so that water's easiest route is not also the most inconvenient for boots. Yard drains and little escape routes. In a house yard or farm courtyard, the same principles apply in miniature. Wherever water collects repeatedly, in front of the door, against a barn wall, in a corner between buildings, someone eventually digs a little escape route, a narrow channel leading away from the problem spot, aimed toward a garden that needs moisture, or toward a lower strip of ground that can handle occasional sogginess. You might notice a small trench starting right at the doorstep stone, cutting across the yard to disappear into a patch of grass or reeds, or running under a simple board bridge where people step. During a downpour, these small drains carry surprising amounts of water, keeping door thresholds shallower, preventing the worst puddles from forming exactly where people need to stand. In dry weather, they're almost invisible, perhaps a faint line where growth is different, or a scar across the yard that only locals can see. Letting the ground breathe between storms. Ditches and drains don't just move water, they also give the ground time. If water leaves a path faster, sun and wind can reach the soil directly, surfaces crust lightly instead of staying soupy. Each dry period counts for more. In places that drain well, mud seasons feel shorter. You still get bad days, but the ground bounces back quickly. Thick porridge becomes merely soft earth between storms. In places without drainage, even small rains restore the worst conditions. Paths never really recover until a long dry spell. Every footstep sinks deeply for weeks at a time. So the work of clearing small channels is also the work of giving the earth time to become itself again between soakings. It's a kindness to boots, yes, but also a kindness to the ground. When drains fail, blockages and overflow. Of course, nothing stays clear on its own. Ditches fill with leaves, fallen twigs, washed down soil from fields, stray straw and rubbish, sometimes stones dislodged by hooves and wheels. Small drains in yards clog with grass clippings, broken bits of pottery, toys, the casual debris of daily life. When this happens, water backs up again onto paths. Puddles appear exactly where people tried to banish them. New, messy rivulets cut their own lines through the mud. So, after heavy storms, you'll often see someone walking along with a stick or shovel, poking at blockage points, pulling out handfuls of wet leaves, loosening trapped mud so water can flow again. It's not glamorous work, but there's a quiet satisfaction in watching a full puddle suddenly begin to empty, the water taking the exit you've reopened for it. The long view, where all this water ends up. Ultimately, all these little ditches and drains feed into something larger, a roadside ditch feeding a small stream, many yard drains trickling into a lower meadow, field edges carrying runoff toward a river. People learn to respect that downstream reality, too, not letting all the water scour one neighbor's garden, not cutting channels that erode others' land, sometimes coordinating where larger ditches should run. In some places, villages agree on main drainage lines, shared ditch maintenance, avoiding certain slopes that could landslide if carved too deeply. So the modest act of clearing a tiny channel beside your path connects to a bigger picture. You're not just saving your own boots, you're participating in how water moves through the whole landscape. A sleep lesson, giving your thoughts somewhere else to go. All this guiding and draining of water has a quiet echo in your mind. There are moments when your thoughts feel like mud, thick, heavy, stuck in one spot, pooling in the same worries over and over. You can't always stop the rain of new problems or emotions, but you can sometimes guide what happens to them afterwards. Instead of letting every difficult thought sit in the same hollow, swirl endlessly, soak deeper and deeper into your mood, you can dig little mental ditches, writing down a problem so it sits on paper instead of in a loop in your head, telling one trusted person about something that circles in your mind, deciding, I will think about this tomorrow at a specific time, and then gently redirecting yourself now, using a simple grounding habit, a walk, a breath, a song, as a channel that
mud doesn't just swallow feet. It remembers everything that passes over it, where wheels went, where hooves stepped, where people always choose to walk. Over time, those memories sink deeper and deeper until your path isn't just muddy, it's rutted. Two long grooves where carts always roll, sharp holes where hooves always fall, a raised ridge in the middle that wobbles under boots, side edges that crumble if you lean on them. Tonight, we're going to move slowly along one of these tired, familiar paths and look at what ruts do, how they form, how they trap water, how they trip ankles, and how people quietly mend them, never perfectly, but enough to keep the same old route usable, season after season. How a smooth track becomes two lines and a ridge. At the start of a dry season, a dirt road or path might look fairly flat, gently crowned in the middle, easy to walk on anywhere. Then weeks and months of use do their work. Carts follow the same comfortable line, wagon wheels roll in the easiest, slightly lower bits, hooves follow wheels, then wheels follow hooves. Rain and meltwater collect where the ground is already a little lower. Each pass presses the same strips a bit deeper, throws a little soil to the sides, strengthens the habit of using precisely those tracks. Eventually, you get two long indentations, the wheel ruts, a narrow raised strip between them, looser shoulders along the path's sides. From above, the road now looks like a three-part sentence: rut, ridge, rut. When mud comes, those ruts fill first and worst. What ruts do to water, and what water does back. Once established, ruts become perfect little canals. When it rains, water runs along them instead of across the path. Puddles lengthen instead of spreading shallowly. Every low point in a rut becomes a miniature pond. When water sits in those lines, it softens the soil even more. Wheels sink deeper. Hooves churn the soaked bottom. Boots push aside the mush and deepen the groove. The deeper the rut, the more it collects water. The more water, the more the rut erodes. It's a quiet feedback loop. Shape invites water. Water changes shape. Shape invites more water. The result is a path that looks usable from a distance, but demands careful strategy from every step. Walking between, on, or in the ruts. On a rutted, muddy track, walkers have three basic choices. In the rut, the lowest part, often full of water or slurry. foot sinks deepest, balance is easiest side to side because the ground slopes gently toward you. But the mud is at its worst here. On the middle ridge, slightly higher, sometimes drier. Narrow, boots can slip sideways into either rut. Wobbly when the ridge is soft, demands careful placing of each step. On the path shoulders, at the very edges near ditches or grass, sometimes firmer if less trafficked, sometimes worse, crumbly or sloping away, often partially blocked by brush, fences, or banks. So every few paces, a walker unconsciously decides, this patch, reg, that puddle, edge. Here the rut is shallow, I'll go through. It's like choosing lines in a slow dance with the road, never quite able to just stroll in the middle. Hooves and wheels, deepening the old wounds. Humans alone don't make the worst ruts. Hooves and wheels finish the job. Hooves concentrate weight into small points, punch down into softened soil, create a pattern of deep, sharp holes within the already low rut, churn the mud at the bottom, breaking any forming crust. Wagon wheels cut long grooves, press those hoof holes even deeper, push mud aside into higher ridges, sometimes get stuck, requiring more force to pull them forward, digging the rut further. Over time, some ruts become so deep that wheels threaten to catch on their edges, require 2 people or more to push a cart through, make drivers curse that they ever chose this route at all. But paths are stubborn. People keep using them because they lead where they need to go, even if they complain while doing it. So, sooner or later, talk turns from complaint to repair. The first repairs, filling the worst holes. Ruts rarely get fixed all at once. They get patched like worn cloth. When a particular spot becomes truly intolerable, wheels jam, animals stumble, people sink every single time, someone brings a few shovelfuls of drier soil from the side, small stones, broken brick, maybe brush or straw. They throw this into the deepest part of the rut, stamp or tamp it down, try a test step or roll a wheel across. The next carts compact this fill further, smooth it by use, sometimes dislodge it if it wasn't packed well. If it works, that hole is less of a trap for a while. If not, more filling comes. Over the course of a season, you might see certain trouble spots darker, stonier, slightly raised, evidence of many minor repairs rather than one major rebuild. The path wears its history of mending like patches on an old coat, none perfect, all appreciated. Raking, scraping, and smoothing between rains. Beyond filling, there is smoothing. On a drier day between storms, someone with a rake or shovel might scrape down the highest ridges between ruts, pull loose material from the sides back towards the center, level out smaller depressions before they become deep holes. It's not easy. Mud dries in irregular crusts. Some sections are still too soft to reshape without making them worse. Your tool sometimes clogs with sticky clumps. But each pass lowers the middle ridge, making it wider and more walkable, partially fills the ruts, creates a slightly crowned surface again, so water is more likely to run off sideways next time. You rarely get a perfect flat road. You get a better one that, in the next rain, behaves a little less like 2 canals and a knife edge. When paths shift away from their old scars. Sometimes the best fix is not to heal the rut, but to move the path. If ruts have become too deep, drainage is poor, every attempt at smoothing fails. People may start walking and driving half a meter to the side, along the grass verge, across a parallel strip that was once field edge. At first, it's temporary. Just today, that section is too bad. We'll cut to the right to avoid that hole. But repeated over weeks, new tracks form in the formerly untouched ground. Old ruts slowly fill with weeds and sediment. The path's center line quietly migrates. From an old map's viewpoint, this looks like nothing, but from the ground, the road you use has shifted sideways by the width of a few careful choices. Over decades, entire lanes can creep across the landscape, leaving behind faint, ghostly scars, old ruts slowly reclaimed by grass, half visible in certain light. Yard ruts are the same story, but smaller. Between door and well, barn and manure pile, house and wood stack, the same patterns appear. Preferred wheel lines, small ridges between them, soft spots that never quite dry. Households throw ashes or straw into the worst yard ruts, move log piles slightly so paths can shift, put down spare boards temporarily when a section becomes too chewed. To an outsider, it might look messy, odd patches of different material, a zigzagging route between buildings, but to the people who live there, it's wonderfully specific. Don't push the barrow there. Go this way. The ground holds better. We moved the wood so we could walk on the firmer patch next to the wall. That old rut always gets slick first. Step to the left before it. The yard, like the road, is a record of repeated use and repeated repair. The satisfaction of a straightened stretch. Every so often, someone invests more effort. Perhaps a village agrees to work together on a particularly bad stretch. A farm owner decides they're tired of getting stuck every rain. A family takes advantage of a dry spell to fix the yard thoroughly. Tools come out in earnest, more soil is brought in, larger stones used for a base, ruts cut down, filled and compressed, a rough crowning shaped on purpose. When it's done, the difference is noticeable. Wheels roll more easily. People no longer have to dance between high and low spots. The path looks more like a gentle arc than a broken smile. There's often a quiet pride in this. No ceremony, just the everyday pleasure of walking a stretch and thinking, this bit is not fighting us anymore. Of course, mud and wheels will try again, but
A muddy path is never used by people alone. The same soft ground that tugs at your boots is also under hooves and paws, cartwheels and barrow wheels, the careful steps of animals who do not understand errand or appointment, but understand very well the difference between firm ground and a hidden hole. Tonight, we're going to walk the mud path together with all of them, watching how animals, carts, and humans share the same narrow, soft roots, how hooves choose their footing, how paws move differently from boots, how carts deepen or disturb the way, and how, quietly, everyone adapts to each other's tracks. Not in a noisy, crowded way, but in the slow, damp rhythm of a village or farm moving carefully through its muddy season. Hooves at the edge of the yard. On the first really wet day, it isn't just people who hesitate at the door. A horse at the edge of a muddy yard shifts its weight from foot to foot, tests the ground with a front hoof, lowers its head, ears flicking as if listening to the earth. A cow leaving the barn pauses on the threshold, sniffs the air, then takes one slow step forward, feeling where it will sink. Even animals who have never read a map understand texture. They feel the give of the soil under them, hear the sound of suction and splash, sense the angle of each slope through their joints. They may not complain out loud about ruined shoes, but their bodies show the same reluctance you feel when you see the path glistening brown ahead. How hooves learn the path. Animals, like people, have favorite routes. Day after day, season after season, a cow walks from barn to pasture and back. A horse travels from stable to road. Goats and sheep move from pen to feeding place. A donkey follows its master along the same narrow lane. In dry weather, their steps are confident.
Hooves clip and clop on hard earth. They cut corners. They sometimes play, prancing or trotting. In mud season, their gait changes. Steps shorten. Hooves are placed more deliberately. Weight is lowered slightly toward the ground. Necks shift to keep balance over every leg. Over time, animals memorize which parts of the yard hold firm, where slopes are treacherous, where deeper holes appear after a big rain. You can see it in the hoof marks, clear lines tracing around the worst puddles, repeated prints along the same narrow strip of ground, a little high road worn where animals choose a more solid edge. They haven't read drainage diagrams or soil charts. They've just made the same quiet observations as humans, with 4 points of contact instead of 2. The heavy hoof and the light hoof. Not all hooves affect a path the same way. A broad cow hoof spreads weight over a larger circle, presses down but more gently, leaves softer rounded depressions. A shod horse hoof is narrower and harder, focuses weight into a smaller area, creates deep, sharp-edged holes that fill with water, can punch through a thin, firm crust into very soft ground beneath. A donkey or smaller animal cuts more modest prints, may tread more lightly by nature, but still adds to the overall churning of the path. The muddy lane becomes a dictionary of these prints. Round, deep cups from cows, crisp, sharp ovals from horses, smaller, scattered marks from goats, sheep, dogs. For walkers, this means scanning ahead to avoid stepping straight into a hoof hole, feeling with the boot where the ground is solid between them, occasionally cursing softly when misjudgment drops a foot into cold brown water. What keeps the animals moving is not that the path is perfect, but that both they and their humans understand its flaws. Pause on the soft ground. Dogs and cats move differently yet again. A dog trotting down a muddy path spreads weight across 4 smaller pads, sinks less deeply than a heavy boot, can adjust quickly if one paw slips, tends to pad along the edges where grass or softer soils offer better grip. You might see a dog pause to sniff at a new puddle, choose a narrower, drier line near a hedge, dart back and forth while humans plod slowly along. Cats, when they venture onto paths, are even more selective, tiptoeing from stone to stone, using fence tops, walls, or fallen logs as high walkways, avoiding the heart of the mud unless absolutely necessary. Their prints, tiny stars between the bigger marks, dots of lightness where others have pressed heavy, evidence that some creatures experience even the wettest season as a series of careful choices rather than constant struggle. Watching paws at work reminds you there is more than one way to move through the same mess. Carts and wheels, pulling weight through the season. Carts bring firewood, manure, harvests, supplies. Their wheels carve the longest, deepest ruts, decide where water will run or stand, determine which part of the path must bear the worst strain. Pulling a cart through mud is slower, tiring, sometimes a little desperate. The animal in front leans into the harness, muscles bunching in shoulders and flanks, hooves searching for the shallowest patches, sometimes slipping, sometimes regaining with a spray of mud. The person behind grips the handles or side, lifts a little to ease the worst of the drag, shouts encouragement, steers toward the faintest hint of solid ground. Together they negotiate. Here we go through the rut. It's deep but straight. Here we climb onto the ridge. It's narrow but drier. Here we swing a little wider. The side looks firmer today. Every loaded trip etches the path deeper. Every successful journey also proves it's still possible. Sharing space, stepping aside, waiting, and reading intent. On a narrow, muddy path, encounters matter. A person on foot meets someone with a barrow, an animal coming the other way,
a loaded cart needing more width, a neighbor with bundles. There isn't always room for everyone to walk in the best place at the same time. So people learn where to step aside without sinking too badly, when to pause on a plank or stone to let others pass, how to climb a little onto a bank to clear the way for wheels and hooves. There's a silent etiquette. Walkers often yield to heavy loads. Those without burdens make more of the small sacrifices. Children are called back from the middle when carts approach, and animals are guided gently, avoiding sudden shifts that would spatter or shove others. Mud exaggerates every motion. A pushed wheel can spray. A startled animal can kick soft earth onto someone else's boots. A careless step can crowd another person into a deeper patch. So kindness becomes practical, to move smoothly, to keep everyone relatively clean, to conserve strength. You can see it in those small exchanges, a nod, a step back, a hand out to steady someone on a slippery edge. Sounds of company on a muddy path. If you close your eyes on a damp day and just listen, a muddy path is full of small, steady noises. The squelch of boots lifting free, the suck of hooves, cartwheels slopping through soft patches, the faint rattle of boards laid over puddles, dogs' paws patting lightly along the edges. Over it all, voices murmuring, occasional laughter when someone's foot disappears a little too far. Low tones of encouragement to animals. Easy now. Steady. Good. There are no roaring engines, no sharp clacks of metal on pavement, just human and animal sounds braided together with the wet earth's replies. Even in the most inconvenient season, there's a kind of companionship in that. You are not the only one struggling. The path does not belong to you alone. Everyone is moving slowly together. In that way, mud takes away some speed, but also some loneliness. The resting points, where loads pause and bodies breathe. Long walks through mud require resting points. You might see a wider patch near a tree where cart handles are set down, a stump or stone where someone perches, boots dangling, breathing hard, a spot near the top of a slope where people naturally stop to regroup. Animals rest there too. Horses allowed a moment to stand, sides heaving. Cows pausing as they're driven, chewing calmly in the midst of mess. Dogs lying briefly on a slightly drier bump of ground. These little clearings in the journey are not really dry, not perfectly clean, but just enough better that people decide, here we pause. The path, like a sentence, has commas and periods, short stretches that mean you can breathe here before the next muddy clause. When the path is closed to some and open to others. On the worst days, the mud becomes too dangerous for a loaded wagon. Wheels simply won't move without risking breaking something. Animals strain and slip too much.
It's one thing to walk through mud. It's another to keep it from following you inside. Paths don't end at the edge of the field or lane. They end at thresholds, on doorsteps, just before clean floors where people cook, eat, sleep, and work. Mud, however, does not respect that line. It loves to cling to boots, dry into dust, drop in chunks on floors, slowly creep from the entrance deeper into the house. Tonight, we'll stand right at that delicate border, where the outdoor path meets the first step up, and look at all the quiet tricks people use to leave the mud outside as much as possible. Scrapers, steps, mats, habits, and small rituals that turn the doorway into a careful filter between soft earth and clean rooms. The threshold as a tiny border. Every house has some kind of threshold, a raised wooden bar, a stone sill, a packed clay lip, a simple board nailed across the bottom of a doorway. It marks several boundaries at once, between public and private, between wind and shelter, between wet and dry. In mud season, the threshold is also the first line of defense against the outside sticking to the inside. You can imagine it as a quiet customs officer. Everything beyond this point should be cleaner. Mud, you stay out. People cooperate with that request by changing how they behave near the door. Boot scrapers: iron, wood, and stone for heavy boots. One of the simplest tools is a boot scraper. It can be a curved piece of iron set into a small frame, a flat bar with a sharp edge, a wooden crossbar, even just a convenient stone with the right angle. You'll often find it right beside the main door, at the bottom of the steps, or mounted into the step itself. The ritual is always the same. Approach from the muddy yard, plant one foot firmly, drag the other boot back and forth along the scraper's edge, knock clumps of mud off the sole and heel. Switch feet and repeat. The sounds: a dull scraping, small thuds as lumps fall away, sometimes a ring if the boot strikes iron just right. Over time, a little fan-shaped patch of dried mud builds up beneath the scraper, periodically swept away or naturally washed by rain, a visual record of everyone who has tried to honor the threshold's request. Stones and steps: raising the door above the worst of the mud. Another quiet strategy is simply to lift the entrance out of the mud's reach. Even a single raised step can mean the worst of the yard puddles never reach the door. Boots have a place to pause. Scraping and stamping can happen on stone instead of immediately on interior floors. Door approaches might be one or two broad stone slabs, a short flight of shallow steps, a small platform made of wood, brick, or tightly packed earth. You might see muddy prints on the lower steps, progressively cleaner prints higher up, the topmost step or sill nearly bare of mud except on the worst days. This small climb is a practical thing, but it also feels symbolic. You leave the lowest, wettest ground behind. You rise even a little closer to dryness. You prepare yourself to move into a different kind of space.
Mud seasons don't last forever. They feel endless while you're in them. Every errand a negotiation, every shoe heavy, every path uncertain. But slowly, quietly, without fanfare, the ground begins to change. Tonight, we're going to stay on the same muddy paths as before and watch what happens when rain lessens, wind picks up, and the sun stays a little longer. We'll see how mud dries, how ruts become brittle, how paths turn to dust, and how people remember the soft season even when the ground feels hard again. Because the story of mud doesn't end when it disappears from your boots. It lives on in the shape of the paths and in the way you walk them. The first hint: cracks in the puddles. Long before everything dries, there are small signs. On a familiar puddle, the surface turns from glossy to dull. A thin skin forms when the wind pauses. Faint lines appear, tiny cracks spidering across the top. When you touch it with your toe, the crust breaks with a gentle snap. Water seeps up through the break. The piece you lifted folds and sinks. For a while, the puddle is both, mud underneath, fragile shell on top. Day after day, the shell grows thicker, cracks widen, edges curl. Eventually, one morning you step near it and the crust holds. Only a little powder flakes off. Nothing slick rises to meet your boot. It's still lower than the path around it, but it is no longer a pool. It is a scar that has stopped bleeding. From soft to springy to hard. Drying isn't instant. The ground moves through stages. Soft and saturated, each step sinks deeply. Water squeezes up and around. Boots feel tugged at. Springy, soil still damp but less liquid. You sink less. The surface gives and returns like a sponge. Firm but marked. Footprints stay but shallow. Wheels leave imprints but don't cut new ruts easily. Hooves no longer punch through every step. Hard, crusted, and then dusty, the top layer forms a rough shell. Tiny bits flake off. Eventually, a light dust rises when you walk. You might notice this through the changing sound of your footsteps, from squelch to thud to soft scuff. The weight of your boots at the end of the day, gradually lighter. How often you need to scrape mud at the door, less and less. It's not one big turning point. It's a series of small, almost invisible transitions that only become obvious when you think back. Wait, when did it stop being a mud path and become just a path again? Ruts turn to hard lines. Those deep ruts carved by wheels and hooves don't vanish when the mud dries. They set. As water leaves, the sides of ruts harden like baked clay. The bottom firms, edges crack but stay in place. The raised ridges between them become solid humps. Walking now, you no longer sink, but you still navigate lines and edges. Ankles feel the sharpness of the dried grooves. Wheels now roll more easily because they're not fighting suction, but can bump and jolt in the hardened tracks, sometimes hop out of one rut and into another with a sharp jerk. Dried mud paths hold the memory of wet seasons in their shape, two long hollows and a central spine, occasional broken chunks of old crust, patches where repairs made with stones sit differently underfoot. Even in bright, dry weather, the earth remembers, once water lived here. Dust, the light shadow of old mud. In time, the very mud that clung to boots becomes dust. As the surface dries, fine particles lift with each step. Wind sifts the topmost layer. Cartwheels grind crust into powder. What once stuck fiercely to your feet now rises briefly in the air, coats leaves and fence rails in a thin film, settles on windowsills and steps. If you walk the same lane months later, your boots may come home not heavy but pale, covered in a dry, easily brushed off layer, the opposite of the weighty mud. Inside houses, people now sweep more dust than soggy clumps, breathe air with a faint earthy smell, still fight the ground's attempt to come indoors, just in a different form. The path has changed mood, from grasping to powdery, from clingy to drifting, but it is, in its own way, still the same earth. Grass and the slow softening of scars. Left alone, nature tries to heal. Along the very edges of dried ruts, small grasses sprout in slight depressions. Weeds find purchase where soil is loosened. Seeds carried by wheels, boots, and animals take root. Tiny plants anchor the soil, break up hard crust with their roots, catch blowing dust before it moves on. In spots where people and carts no longer pass as often, the bottoms of ruts fill slowly with new growth. Edges crumble gently into the hollows. The clear, sharp lines blur into softer shapes. Over years, an old, unused track might just become a pair of faint troughs in a grassy field, visible only when the light hits sideways at morning or evening, a hint of past journeys. Even paths that stay in use can soften, as people deliberately rake or fill them, as plants edge closer from the sides, as the worst scars of last mud season are gradually worn into something gentler. Remembering with your feet. When the ground is firm again, something interesting happens. Your body remembers the mud, even when your eyes see nothing but dust and hard earth. You might still shorten your steps over a place that used to be slick. You might walk slightly to one side where the high ground once saved you. Your ankles might tense automatically at a slope that was dangerous in the wet weeks.
On a bright, dry day, someone new might walk through laughing, "What a nice, easy lane!" You, who trudged it when it was a brown river, might feel differently. You haven't seen it in rain. The path's history lives both in its ruts and small repairs, and in the cautious or confident way long-time walkers move. Even when mud is gone, its lessons remain in your muscles. Tools rest in the corner. There is a day when the boot scraper goes mostly unused, mats dry and stay dry, the shovel leans more quietly against the wall. People notice fewer clumps by the door, less need to pause and scrape, yards that no longer squelch with each step. Tools are cleaned, mended if needed, put a little farther back in the shed, waiting for the next time they're called to the front. It is not triumph, it is a gentle exhale. We got through another muddy season. And perhaps without making a fuss about it, people allow themselves to walk a little more loosely, take slightly bigger steps, look up more often instead of always watching the ground. The path in memory versus the ground underfoot. Years later, someone might tell a story. "I remember when that path was nothing but mud. We used to sink to our ankles here. Carts got stuck in that bend every spring." A child or newcomer looking at the current path sees only a slightly uneven track, maybe a few old flattened stones, some wide, firm ruts used mostly by bikes or light wheels now. They might think, "It doesn't look so bad." Both views are true, the ground as it is now, and the ground as it felt back when each step was a pull. In your own life, there are similar differences. Someone sees you now and thinks your path looks easy. They don't know the mud you walked through to make it look this way. The earth of your story holds both versions at once.
Mud doesn't stay only on the ground. It writes itself on people. On market days, visit days, any day when many feet travel, hemlines, coat ends, trouser legs, apron corners, all tell stories about which paths folks have followed and how soft the ground has been lately. Tonight, we're going to walk into a small town or village on a damp week and look, gently and without judgment, at how mud shows up on clothes and what that says about where people live, how far they've walked, which routes are worst, and how quietly proud some are of arriving mostly clean. Not to compare or shame, but to understand how much the shape of the ground ends up reflected in the way we see each other. Market morning. Many muddy routes converge. Picture a market morning after a week of off and on rain. From farms, cottages, and hamlets around the town, people move, on foot, with carts, on horseback, with baskets and bundles. Each has left a house where a path was patched with boards, a yard was softened, a boot scraper did its best, doorway mats worked overtime. By the time they reach the town edge, boots are already patterned with splashes, lower garments show dark marks, hems are a little heavier than usual. Yet as they gather in the square or along the main street, each person appears simply as themselves, standing on the same cobbles or beaten earth, the messy part of the journey quietly clinging to the bottom of their clothing. Hemlines as tiny maps. Look down, not rudely, just curiously, at the lower edges of clothes. You'll see neatly brushed hems with only a faint dusting of dried mud, heavily spattered skirts and trousers, sharp brown lines that show where fabric was splashed and then dried, uneven patches where cloth brushed against bushes or boards. These patterns can hint at distance. Someone from nearby, walking mostly on firm lanes, may be less marked than a person from far out on clay-heavy tracks. Route. Long streaks up the sides suggest narrow, deep ruts. Rounded spots speak of walking through pools or over splashing boards. Task. A person who drove animals or carts may have more mud in front from walking near hooves and wheels. Someone who carried loads may have their splatters higher from unavoidable splashes. None of this is exact, of course, but if you've walked those same paths, your body recognizes, I know this kind of stain. I've stepped in that kind of mud. It's a quiet recognition between travelers. The always muddy jobs. Some people, no matter the season, carry more earth on them than others. Think of stable hands, field workers, drovers guiding animals through lanes, those who haul water, fuel, or manure. Their lower clothing often has old, layered markings, new splashes overlaying older stains, fabric worn and stiff where mud has repeated its work. They may brush and wash as much as they can, but the next day's tasks await. The next wet stretch of past calls. Mud returns quickly. Among neighbors, this is well understood. It isn't carelessness. It isn't a lack of respect for cleanliness. It is the visible price of necessary work. In market space, they stand beside those whose tasks keep them mostly indoors, each carrying marks of their own parts of the world. Quiet pride in clean steps. Others take a certain quiet pride in how little mud they bring with them. They may choose longer routes that stay on firmer ground, wait for paths to dry before traveling, walk more slowly and carefully, use boards and stones with deliberate precision. At market, you might notice neats with carefully scraped soles, skirts and trousers only faintly touched by earth. The way some people glance down once, reassured that their efforts show. This isn't vanity exactly. It's the satisfaction of having wrestled with the same conditions as everyone else and found a way to arrive a little less weighted, a little less splashed. Sometimes this is born from necessity, someone with a fragile health, someone visiting a respected elder, someone going to a place where appearances matter. Their careful walking is its own kind of skill, as exact and practiced as handling a cart or guiding an animal. Borrowed cleanliness, changing at the threshold. For some, especially when visiting important places, a town office, a church, a house of higher status, there is the option to change at arrival. They might bring an extra pair of shoes, carry a cleaner outer garment folded in a basket, borrow indoor slippers or overshoes upon entry. Mud remains, by the door, inside rooms, on pegs and mats. The person inside appears, freshly brushed, tidy, seemingly untouched by the bad footing outside, but they know which plank they nearly slipped from, which ditch they had to jump, which rut nearly stole their boot. Their neatness isn't evidence of an easy path, just of an extra layer of ritual at the threshold. When mud becomes part of style. There are times and places where mud is so common that it almost becomes invisible, a background condition like wind or dust. In such seasons, people stop apologizing for marks up to mid-calf. Conversation rarely mentions splashes unless they're unusually dramatic. A bit of earth on cloth is simply expected. You might see someone brush off a dried clump with a small smile. Neighbors glance at each other's hems and share knowing expressions. A child proudly show how high the mud reached on their legs from a particularly adventurous route. In that context, clean and dirty shift quietly. Cleanliness isn't the complete absence of mud. It's about keeping it within agreed boundaries, not on tables, not on bedding, as little as possible in shared indoor spaces. Clothes can be good enough, even when visibly marked, as long as they respect those boundaries. Social distance in footprints. On a market day, the kind of mud on your clothes can also hint at social distance. Someone from a hill farm might bring light, crumbly marks from stony paths. River flats might be stained with darker, heavier clay. The main road near town might show more dust than true mud. When these people gather, their garments carry hints of different terrains. Their boots remember slightly different struggles. Their hemlines show how close or far they live from the place where they now stand together. No one has to say, I walked 3 hours through clay to get here, for the keen-eyed to suspect it. But equally,
No one needs to judge. The path each person took simply is. Children and mud as ornament. Children often treat mud as something to play with, something to test, not just something to avoid. On days when adults are carefully stepping around the worst patches, children might run right through them, jump in shallow pools, deliberately make footprint chains. Their clothes end up streaked higher, spattered in wild patterns, sleeves and knees as decorated as hymns. Some parents scold, some sigh and shrug, some quietly remember doing the same. For children, mud on clothes is less about the difficulty of the path and more about the delight of having been in the path fully. Their world still has room for that kind of reckless, soft-season joy. Washing day, when the path leaves the fabric. Eventually, clothes need more than brushing and scraping. On washing day, garments are soaked, scrubbed against boards or stones, worked with soap or ash, rinsed and wrung. Mud loosens from fibers, clouds the wash water, sinks to the bottom of tubs, troughs, or river edges. The water then is thrown out onto fields or paths, returns a diluted version of the earth to the earth, leaving cloth lighter, cleaner, ready for the next round. There's a small satisfaction in watching water run brown and then clear, proof that the path's weight has been lifted, at least from garments, even if the ground itself is still soft. On lines or bushes or racks, the drying clothes flutter, showing faint ghost stains here and there, but far less than before, ready to go out and meet the world again. A sleep lesson, seeing the mud on others gently. All this talk of marked hems and spattered fabric has a quiet echo inside you. We all carry signs of where we've walked, tiredness in the face, a way of speaking when stressed, habits that make sense only if you've known our weather, scars, visible or hidden. Sometimes you see someone and think, they look messy, they seem overcautious, they move strangely in social spaces. What you may be seeing is the mud from the path they just walked, the remnants of a difficult season, stains from roads you've never tried yourself. You can choose, gently, to see their marks as hints, not judgments. Offer a kind space where they don't have to pretend their journey was dust-free. Remember that your own clothes have been more splattered at times than others realized. And for yourself, you can accept that coming out of certain stretches of life will leave visible traces, that it's not shameful to carry a little mud when you've just crossed a difficult road, that you're allowed to stand among others in the square, even if your hymns are not pristine. Being worthy of belonging does not require having completely spotless shoes.